In a cave in northern Spain, archaeologists found bones. Neanderthal bones. 12 individuals, men, women, teenagers, children. All from the same family group. Their DNA evidence tells us that much. But these weren't buried with care. They weren't laid to rest with ceremony or flowers or the kind of reverence we'd expect for the dead. They were butchered, cut apart with stone tools, the bones cracked open methodically to extract the marrow inside. Skull fragments scattered across the cave floor, processed like the remains of a hunted animal. This wasn't an attack by predators. Cave bears didn't do this. Hyenas didn't do this. The marks on the bones are unmistakably human, made by stone tools, wielded with purpose and precision. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a natural death followed by scavenging. This was cannibalism. And the evidence suggests it happened not once, but across multiple Neanderthal populations, separated by thousands of miles and tens of thousands of years. From Spain to Croatia to France, the pattern repeats. The same butchery techniques, the same methodical processing of human remains. The same species whose DNA flows through your veins right now, the species we talked about in the last video, the ones who are literally part of you, they ate each other. And today, we are going to explore the evidence, examine why it might have happened, and confront what this disturbing truth tells us about the Neanderthals, about humanity, and maybe about ourselves. Because this isn't just about them, this is about us too. And today, we will be breaking it down. For a long time, we had a romanticized view of Neanderthals. After decades of portraying them as brutish cavemen, the pendulum swung the other way. We discovered they were intelligent, creative, capable of symbolic thought. They made art, they buried the dead, they cared for the sick and injured, they had complex social structures. And all of that is true. Neanderthals were sophisticated, deeply human in ways we're still uncovering. But like all humans, they were also capable of darkness, of violence, of things that make us uncomfortable to think about. The evidence for Neanderthal cannibalism isn't new exactly. Archaeologists have suspected it for decades, but it was always controversial, always debated, always explained away with alternative theories. Maybe the cut marks were from defleshing as part of burial rituals. Maybe the broken bones were accidental. Maybe predators scattered the remains after death. But as forensic techniques improved, as more sites were discovered, as the evidence accumulated, the conclusion became unavoidable. Neanderthals practiced cannibalism, and we can prove it. The site that provides the clearest, most undeniable evidence is a cave called El Cedrón, located in the Asturias region of northern Spain. It's not a large cave, not a famous one like Lascaux or Altamira, but what was found there in 1994 would fundamentally change our understanding of Neanderthal behavior. Deep inside the cave, in a tunnel that had been sealed off for 49,000 years, archaeologists discovered the remains of 12 Neanderthals. 3 adult males, 3 adult females, 3 adolescents, and 3 children. The bones were scattered, broken, mixed together in a way that suggested violent disturbance rather than careful burial. When researchers began examining the bones more closely, they noticed something disturbing. The bones bore marks, lots of marks. Cut marks made by stone tools, percussion marks from impacts designed to break open bone, scrape marks where flesh had been removed. These weren't random marks. They formed patterns, consistent patterns, the same patterns you see on animal bones that have been butchered for food. Let me be specific about what they found because the details matter. On the long bones, the femurs and tibias and humeri, there were cut marks clustered around the joints. This is where you'd cut to dismember a body, to separate limbs from the torso. The marks were shallow, precise, the kind you make when you're carefully cutting through connective tissue and tendons. On the shafts of these bones, away from the joints, there were different marks, scrape marks running lengthwise along the bone. This is what you do when you're removing muscle tissue, scraping the meat off the bone. It's efficient, it's systematic. It's exactly what you do if you were processing an animal carcass. But the most telling evidence came from the broken bones themselves. The long bones had been smashed open, fractured in a specific way that's called percussion breakage. You see this when someone takes a hammerstone and deliberately strikes a bone to crack it open and access the marrow inside. Marrow is rich in fat and nutrients. It's a valuable food source, and the Neanderthals at El Cedrón were clearly after it, because virtually every long bone in the cave had been broken open in this way. And then there are the skulls. 4 skulls were found at El Cedrón, all of them damaged. The facial bones had been removed, broken away from the cranium. The base of the skull, where it connects to the spine, showed cut marks. This is consistent with decapitation, with removing the head from the body. But more than that, the skulls themselves had been opened. The cranial vaults, the rounded top part of the skull that houses the brain, had been fractured and pried apart. This isn't something that happens naturally. This is something you do deliberately when you want to access the brain inside. Let me paint the full picture of what happened at El Cedrón based on the forensic evidence. 49,000 years ago, a group of 12 Neanderthals died in or near this cave. They were all killed around the same time, their bodies processed together. Someone, another group of Neanderthals presumably, dismembered them, cut the limbs from the torsos, removed the heads, scraped the meat from the bones, cracked open the bones to extract the marrow inside, opened the skulls to access the brains. And here's where it gets even more disturbing. DNA analysis of the El Cedrón Neanderthals revealed that they were related to each other. This wasn't a random collection of individuals. This was a family group. Parents, children, siblings, cousins. They lived together, traveled together, and died together.
And then they were eaten. Now, before we go further, we need to address the obvious question. How do we know this was cannibalism and not something else? How do we know this wasn't just burial practice or some kind of mortuary ritual that involved processing the bodies? The answer lies in comparison. Archaeologists have excavated thousands of Neanderthal sites across Europe and Western Asia. We have hundreds of Neanderthal burials, places where the dead were clearly interred with care, sometimes with grave goods, sometimes with evidence of ritual. Those burials look nothing like El Cedrón. In proper burials, the bodies are intact or largely intact. They're arranged carefully, the bones aren't scattered or broken, there are no cut marks, no percussion fractures, no evidence of systematic processing. El Cedrón looks like a butchery site. And when you compare the marks on the Neanderthal bones to the marks on animal bones from the same period, the same cave systems, they're identical. The same techniques, the same tool marks, the same pattern of dismemberment and processing. The Neanderthals at El Cedrón were butchered exactly the way Neanderthals butchered deer, horses, and bison. There's no meaningful difference in the treatment of the human remains versus the animal remains. And El Cedrón isn't alone. It's just the best preserved, most thoroughly studied example. But there are others, many others. At Krapana Cave in Croatia, a site dating to about 130,000 years ago, archaeologists found the remains of multiple Neanderthals mixed with animal bones in what appears to be a trash heap. The Neanderthal bones showed the same pattern of cut marks, breakage, and processing as the animal bones nearby. At Molagursi in France, a 100,000-year-old site, 6 Neanderthals were found with clear evidence of defleshing, dismemberment, and marrow extraction. The bones were discarded in the same layer as processed deer and other game animals. At Vingia Cave in Croatia, more evidence of cannibalism dating to about 40,000 years ago. At Comgrenel in France, at Marillac, also in France, at multiple sites across Spain, Italy, and the Balkans. This isn't a one-time event. This isn't a single aberrant group. This is a pattern that spans more than 100,000 years of Neanderthal history and stretches across their entire geographic range. Neanderthals ate other Neanderthals. Not rarely, not as some desperate last resort in a single crisis, but repeatedly, across time and space, as part of their behavioral repertoire. Now we need to ask the hardest question. Why? Why would Neanderthals eat each other? What could drive this behavior? There are several possibilities, and the honest answer is we probably can't know for certain. We're trying to understand the motivations of people who died tens of thousands of years ago, people who left no written records, no oral traditions, no explanations. All we have are bones and the marks on them. But we can make informed guesses based on what we know about human behavior, about survival, about culture, and about the specific contexts of these sites. The first and most obvious explanation is survival cannibalism. Starvation, desperation, the last resort when all other food sources have failed. Neanderthals lived during the Ice Age, not the Hollywood version with mammoths on every corner, but the real Ice Age, with its brutal winters, its unpredictable climate swings, its periods of extreme scarcity. There were times and places where finding food would have been incredibly difficult. If a group of Neanderthals was caught in a particularly harsh winter, if the herds migrated away, if hunting failed for weeks or months, starvation would have been a real possibility. And when you're starving, when your children are starving, when death is imminent, the normal rules break down. There are documented cases of survival cannibalism throughout human history. The Donner Party in 1846, the 1972 Andes flight disaster, numerous Arctic expeditions, sieges and famines across the world. When people face the choice between eating the dead and dying themselves, some choose to eat. It's horrifying. It's one of the most taboo acts in virtually every human culture, but it happens. And it's not irrational. It's the ultimate survival strategy when all others have failed. So it's entirely plausible that some of the Neanderthal cannibalism we see in the fossil record was survival cannibalism, groups pushed to the absolute limit, making impossible choices in impossible circumstances. But there's a problem with this explanation. If El Cedrone was survival cannibalism, if these Neanderthals were eaten because the alternative was starvation, why do we see the same pattern at multiple sites separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles? Survival cannibalism should be rare, occurring only in extreme circumstances. It shouldn't be common enough to show up repeatedly in the archaeological record, and yet it does. This suggests that at least some Neanderthal cannibalism wasn't about survival. It was about something else. The second possibility is warfare or intergroup violence. Not eating your own group out of hunger, but eating your enemies. We know from the archaeological record and from studies of modern hunter-gatherers that pre-agricultural peoples engaged in violence. Not constantly, not as their primary activity, but it happened. Raids between groups, territorial disputes, revenge killings, competition over resources or women or status. And in some cultures, past and present, eating your enemies is part of warfare. It's a way of asserting dominance, of humiliating the defeated, of absorbing their strength or destroying their identity. It's psychological warfare made literal. There are other examples. At Herxheim in Germany, a site dating to about 7,000 years ago, archaeologists found the remains of possibly 500 individuals who appeared to have been systematically butchered and consumed. 500 people. This wasn't a small family group. This was mass cannibalism on a scale that's hard to comprehend. At Font-Brégueux Cave in France, 6,000 years ago, more evidence of Homo sapiens cannibalism. At Moncos in the American Southwest, about 1,000 years ago, ancestral Puebloan people showing evidence of cannibalism. At sites around the world, across time periods, the pattern appears. Homo sapiens ate other Homo sapiens. Not in every culture, not in every time period, but often enough that we have archaeological evidence from multiple continents spanning tens of thousands of years. Cannibalism is not a Neanderthal thing. It's a human thing. And here's where we need to be honest about history. Even in recent centuries, even in civilized societies, cannibalism has occurred. Not just in survival situations, but as accepted practice. In medieval and early modern Europe, there was a practice called medicinal cannibalism. People consumed human body parts, usually from Egyptian mummies or executed criminals, believing they had healing properties. Ground-up mummy, called mumia, was sold in apothecaries and prescribed by physicians for various ailments. Human blood was drunk as a cure for epilepsy. Human fat was used in ointments. Powdered human skull was considered medicine. This wasn't considered barbaric or taboo. It was medical practice, recommended by learned doctors, engaged in by educated wealthy people. And in times of famine and siege, even in Europe, there are documented cases of cannibalism. The siege of Marrow during the First Crusade in 1098, the siege of Santerre in France in 1573, the Great Famine in Ireland in the 1840s with some disputed accounts of cannibalism, the siege of Leningrad during World War II. Humans eat humans when circumstances push them to it, or sometimes when culture permits it, or sometimes, horrifyingly, when individuals are broken enough to do it for their own reasons, which we see in criminal cases of cannibalism in modern times. The point is, we need to stop thinking about Neanderthal cannibalism as something alien or monstrous, something that separates them from us. Because we do the same things. We've always done the same things. Neanderthals weren't monsters, they were humans, and humans, under the right or wrong circumstances, are capable of cannibalism. So what does this all mean? What should we take away from the disturbing evidence we've examined? First, it should humble us. For too long, we've told ourselves a story about human uniqueness, about how we're fundamentally different from other animals, governed by higher principles, by morality and culture and restraint. But the archaeological record tells us a different story. It tells us that humans, whether Neanderthal or Homo sapiens, are capable of extraordinary violence, that under pressure, or when cultural norms permit it, we can do things that seem unthinkable. This doesn't make us evil. It makes us flexible, adaptable, capable of surviving in a wide range of circumstances. But it should make us less arrogant about our moral superiority over our ancestors or over other species. Second, it should make us rethink our relationship with Neanderthals. In the last video, we talked about how Neanderthal DNA is inside you, inside most people of non-African descent. We carry their genes, their adaptations, their evolutionary legacy. And now we know we also carry the legacy of their behavior, the capacity for violence, for cannibalism, for doing whatever it takes to survive. That's part of our inheritance too. You are part Neanderthal, and Neanderthals ate each other. What does that mean about the violence we're capable of, about the darkness that exists within human nature? Third, and perhaps most importantly, this evidence should make us question the nature of taboos. We think of certain behaviors, like cannibalism, as universally wrong, as inherently immoral, as things no human society would accept. But the evidence suggests that's not true. Taboos are cultural, not biological. They vary across time and place. What's unthinkable in one society is normal in another. The strong taboo against cannibalism that most of us feel today is a product of our specific cultural context. It's not hardwired into our DNA. It's learned, reinforced by society, part of how we're raised. And if circumstances change, if culture changes, if the rules shift, that taboo could weaken or disappear. It has before. It could again. This is an uncomfortable thought. We like to think our moral intuitions are absolute, that right and wrong are fixed and universal. But anthropology teaches us otherwise. What's sacred to one group is profane to another. What's forbidden in one era is permitted in another. The Neanderthals at El Cedrone were killed and eaten 49,000 years ago. We don't know why. We don't know how they felt about it, whether they saw it as wrong or necessary or normal or sacred. We can't ask them. We can only look at the bones and the marks on them and try to understand. But what we can say is this: they were humans, as human as we are. They had language, culture, families, beliefs. They made art and music and tools. They cared for their sick and buried their dead. And sometimes they also killed and ate each other. That duality, that capacity for both care and violence, for both civilization and brutality, that's the human condition. It was true 49,000 years ago. It's true today. We are not separate from our ancestors. We are not fundamentally different from the Neanderthals whose DNA we carry. We are them, and they are us. And if we're honest with ourselves, we have to acknowledge that the darkness we see in the El Cedrone bones, the violence and the cannibalism, that potential exists in us too. Not because we're Neanderthal, but because we're human. The question is not whether we're capable of such things. The evidence says we are, that we have been throughout history. The question is what we choose to do with that knowledge. Do we pretend it doesn't exist, that we're above such behavior, that it's something only primitive people did? Or do we acknowledge it, understand it, and consciously choose to build cultures and societies that restrain those darker impulses, that teach us to see other humans as people, not resources, that create strong enough taboos against violence that it becomes unthinkable, even when it might be practical? Those taboos aren't natural. They aren't inevitable. They have to be maintained, reinforced, taught to every generation. And when they break down, when circumstances change enough, when culture shifts, humans are capable of reverting to the kind of behavior we see at El Cedrone. The Aztecs practiced ritual cannibalism of war captives. Some Amazonian tribes historically consumed parts of slain enemies. Even in Europe, there are accounts from as recently as the 16th and 17th centuries of soldiers consuming body parts of defeated foes, though these accounts are disputed. Could the Neanderthals at El Cedrone have been killed by a rival group and then cannibalized as an act of dominance or desecration? It's possible. The fact that they were all killed around the same time, that they were a family group, that their bodies were processed so thoroughly, it could fit the pattern of a raid or an ambush followed by ritualized consumption. But again, we can't be certain. There's no smoking gun, no clear evidence of violence before death at El Cedrone. The cut marks are all post-mortem, made after they died. We don't know how they died, whether it was violent or natural. The third possibility, and perhaps the most disturbing, is that Neanderthal cannibalism was neither survival nor warfare, but simply cultural, a normal part of how they dealt with the dead, or a ritual practice with meanings we can't fully understand. In some human cultures, consuming the dead isn't taboo. It's part of mortuary practice. The Fore people of Papua New Guinea practiced mortuary cannibalism until the 1960s. When a person died, the body was ritually consumed by family members as a way of honoring the dead, keeping them within the community even after death. This practice had terrible consequences. It spread kuru, a prion disease similar to mad cow disease. But the point is, it wasn't seen as horrific or taboo within that culture. It was normal, even respectful. Could some Neanderthal groups have had similar practices? Could they have consumed their dead as part of funeral rites, as a way of dealing with death in their community? It's possible, but the evidence doesn't quite fit. Mortuary cannibalism usually involves careful, ritualized processing of the body. There's often evidence of cremation or other special treatment alongside the cannibalism. And typically the bones are then buried or otherwise accorded respect. At LC Drone and other sites, the bones were just discarded, mixed with animal remains and garbage. This doesn't look like reverent ritual. This looks like butchery. Which brings us to the fourth, and perhaps the most unsettling possibility, that for at least some Neanderthals, at least some of the time, cannibalism was simply practical, not a desperate act of survival, not a ritual, not warfare, but just pragmatism. Meat is meat. Protein is protein. If you've killed members of another group, or if someone has died and there's nutritious tissue going to waste, why not use it? This seems cold, even inhuman. Our modern taboo against cannibalism is so strong that we recoil from the idea of anyone treating it casually. But taboos are cultural constructs. They're not universal, not hardwired into our biology. What if some Neanderthal groups simply didn't have a strong taboo against eating other Neanderthals? What if, in their cultural framework, the line between people you don't eat and people you might eat under certain circumstances was drawn differently than we draw it? This doesn't make them monsters. It makes them different from us, operating under different cultural rules. But it's deeply uncomfortable to contemplate. The truth is, we probably can't pinpoint a single explanation for all Neanderthal cannibalism. Different instances probably had different motivations. Some might have been survival, some might have been violence and warfare, some might have been ritual, some might have been pragmatic. What we can say is that Neanderthals were capable of eating other Neanderthals, and they did so repeatedly over a span of more than 100,000 years. Now, before we get too judgmental, before we start thinking of Neanderthals as uniquely savage or brutal, we need to confront an uncomfortable fact. We did it too. Homo sapiens, our species, also practiced cannibalism, and we have the evidence to prove it. One of the most striking examples comes from Gough's Cave in England, a site dating to about 14,700 years ago. This is well after Neanderthals went extinct. These are anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, people who were genetically and physically identical to us. At Gough's Cave, archaeologists found human remains that had been processed in exactly the same way as the Neanderthals at LC Drone. Cut marks indicating dismemberment and defleshing. Percussion fractures where bones were smashed open for marrow. Evidence of butchery and consumption. But what makes Gough's Cave particularly disturbing is what they did with the skulls. After removing the brain, the skulls were carefully modified, shaped, and polished to be used as drinking cups. Skull cups, used for consuming liquids, possibly blood or other ritual beverages. This wasn't survival cannibalism. This was ritualized, elaborate, meaningful in ways we can't fully understand. And it was done by our ancestors, by Homo sapiens. This has happened in living memory in Rwanda, in Yugoslavia, in Cambodia, in countless other places where neighbor turned on neighbor, where normal people committed atrocities that seemed impossible before they happened. We like to think we're past all that we've evolved beyond our violent past, but the archaeological record and recent history both tell us otherwise. The capacity is still there. It was there in the Neanderthals 49,000 years ago. It's in us now, and it will be in our descendants for as long as humans exist. What we do with that capacity, how we choose to channel or restrain or transcend it, that's up to us. That's always been up to us. The bones at El Cedrón are a reminder, not a pleasant one, not a comforting one, but an important one nonetheless. We are capable of extraordinary things, humans are, art and music and science and love and civilization, but we're also capable of extraordinary violence. Both are true, both are human, both are our inheritance. What we do with that inheritance is the most important question we face. Thanks for watching. This was a heavy topic, I know, but it's an important one. If you made it this far, you're officially part of the tribe. So hit that like button, leave a comment below telling me what you think about Neanderthal cannibalism, whether you think it was survival, ritual, warfare, or something else entirely. And if you haven't already, go back and watch the video about Neanderthal DNA, because these two stories are connected. You carry their genes, and now you know you also carry the legacy of their behavior, for better and worse. Subscribe for more deep dives into human evolution, into the uncomfortable truths about our past, and into what all of this means for who we are today. I'll see you in the next one.